Okay,
So
we're started.
Joey, you left off with, you had explained that there are probably some, you know, white people, or excuse me, some that the idea that some white Jews, may or may not recognize their privilege, but you said that not all Jews are white and that it's contextual, which was the last thing that you said.
Yeah, that's correct. It's contextual because I know I've met Jews who grew up in middle America where they were like the only Jew in their class and they were bullied horribly. I've known Jews who were fired from their jobs for being Jewish because of discrimination. I had a Jewish friend who mentioned.
And I want to correct myself. You didn't say that they don't recognize privilege. That's not what you said, actually.
Well, some, yes. I mean, obviously, some white Jews don't, just like some white people in general don't. But that's yeah. I mean, that's. So yeah. That is true. Absolutely. But the point being that like I think that a lot of Jews who grew up in a place like New York where being Jewish is the norm, maybe didn't experience anti-Semitism as much. I mean, I know because I come from a mixed family and I grew up celebrating both sets of holidays. I don't ever really remember experiencing anti-Semitism in my childhood, and I didn't really even think of myself as Jewish for a long time until I started becoming more aware of Jewish identity. But there are a lot of places in this country where anybody who has stereotypically Jewish characteristics would be singled out. Anybody who's known to be Jewish would be horribly bullied. So in that sense, there's cases in which being Jewish is similar, I think, to the identity of people who might be white passing, like either white Latinos, white or light skinned Black people who could pass as white in certain circumstances. I think in the sense that Jewish white privilege under certain circumstances is conditional, and that kind of goes to a larger issue of how who is considered white changes from decade to decade. Like what I say about Jews, there's probably a time where it applied to Italians as well, like who, if they moved, say, to Alabama, would be seen as not white. And I think that the problem that you were talking about within the Black community and Black people, like Nick Cannon, seeing Jews as white and being unable to recognize that, I think that is also true with a lot of white leftists, as I was saying, and particularly white leftists who maybe had a Christian upbringing, who maybe come from the South or the Midwest, and were never really knew many Jews, and but they might have grown up just as they grew up with racist stereotypes. They might have grown up with some anti-Semitic stereotypes. So they'll get to a place where they might start to become aware of their racism and start to challenge it. They might become anti-racist, but they'll be in circles. They'll be in leftist circles where anti-Semitism isn't taken seriously, or where accusations of anti-Semitism are just seen. And this kind of goes to the opposite problem of what I was talking about, where some see any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. The flip side of that is, in a lot of leftist circles, any criticism of anti-Semitism is just not taken seriously, and oftentimes oftentimes because leftists think that it's just bad faith or disingenuous, and it's just it's just like subtle support for Israel, and that's a problem with.
Now, how do you mean by critics of anti-Semitism isn't taken serious? Can you you
Well, yeah,
lost me there? Not lost me, but I just need some more meat.
Like oftentimes anti-Semitism in leftist spaces will be allowed to sort of fly under the radar. Like one example of it, like we were talking about earlier, is some of those conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds. There's a time when those were very sort of widely floating around in Occupy Wall Street type circles, and people would try to challenge them and point out that they were anti-Semitic in origin, or like somebody would post some sort of derogatory cartoon that had like derogatory Jewish caricatures in it, and leftists wouldn't notice that. And if you tried to call them out on it, if you tried to say this is anti-Semitic and anti-Semitism is bad, they would just be oblivious to it, oftentimes in a way that they wouldn't be to racist caricatures or to homophobic caricatures.
I just want to say, I totally understand. Like I can sympathize with what you're saying, because it's one of the reasons why I can be critical of a certain group of white liberals or a white liberal thought process, especially as it pertains to this particular election and criticism of Joe Biden. I often wonder, and maybe a month ago, I don't want to stray too far away on a different tangent. I just want to give you perspective on why I sympathize. A couple months ago, I kind of went off on a tangent, maybe not a couple months ago, maybe a month ago, right before George Floyd was murdered. No, Ahmaud Arbery. I was, feeling some type of way because I feel like sometimes there are groups of white liberals that, similar to what you were saying, just like ignore, it's like you want me to vote a certain way, but that every single time that vote rarely benefits me. But exactly, you just won't address it. You understand what I'm saying? You just won't.
Yeah.
So I totally understand.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that in different ways, liberals and leftists can be oblivious to anti-Semitism and racism. So I'm glad we're able to sort of empathize with each other and sort of recognize that common reality, that common struggle, because I think that's more of what we need.
Well, we discussed, I brought to Ish's attention and to the, general attention of some folks on Facebook, the problems that Star Trek had with anti-Semitic tropes. And, I definitely met some folks who were kind of resistant to that. Ish, even in the beginning, was like just kind of like surprised and
a little resistant, to be honest.
Yeah, and resistant.
Until you
I broke it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, until absolutely. I broke it down.
Joey, I just want to preface, I was only resistant to the notion he's talking about he's talking about the Ferengi and how they are potentially a Jewish stereotype.
Yeah.
And I was only resistant because I always understood Gene Roddenberry to be Jewish. But then it was kind of brought to my attention that the Ferengi may have been created, after Gene Roddenberry died.
Wow, yeah. That makes a lot of sense, actually, for sure.
Well, so yeah, there's a few things there. I mean, first of all, I posted it with an article. So I've been, getting back into Star Trek a lot recently, but I had never really delved into Deep Space Nine too much. And a friend of mine was singing its praises. And so I got into Deep Space Nine, and then I bounced to Voyager for a little bit. Then I even watched a few Enterprise episodes. Now I'm, then I kind of bounced back into Next Generation. the other day. I was watching a original series episode, but long story short, I had always like had this distaste for the Ferengis. I just found them to be like very weird and like unsettling, and I just never liked them as characters. I thought they were caricatures, and I thought that they didn't fit in like the other characters. They didn't seem that realistic to me. They were kind of like creepy and weird. And then all of a sudden it hit me like a bag of bricks. And then I felt like naive and kind of silly. I'm like, oh shit, this is a anti-Semitic, these are anti-Semitic tropes I'm seeing, with even the way that they physically look, and then their whole MO. Are you into the Star Trek?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah. Although it's been a while, is this from the original series?
No. So this was
No.
Deep Space. This was Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, I admit I'm less
Yeah,
familiar with that.
the Ferengi
They're
are
most prominent on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, they're brown. They're on every single episode, so you can't get away from them. They're shorter, dark-skinned characters with these really big ears, these like kind of like ugly noses and like really bad skin, and their whole thing is like money and kind of like ripping people off.
Their
like,
entire culture and religion is based around profit.
Yeah, it's like the art.
Yeah.
Everything is the art of the deal, and they're always quoting this like book, like rule number, 122. Always like make a profit when you can, or like it's like all of this stuff. And so what happened was I posted this article, right? And so like Ish was kind of like, Ish often takes the Ish often kind of looks at things and is like, is this a real thing, or is this someone trying to like maybe show how woke they are, or if this is someone like practicing some type of cancel culture? So when I posted the article,
And I think that's a valid question to ask too, because I am a critic of cancel culture. But
yeah,
go on.
Yeah, we often ask that question on this show.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the position that he took. I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I came to this position on my own, and I just happened to find an article that like talked about this issue in sci-fi, but particularly they went into the Ferengi and Star Trek. So then like the moment I mentioned the Ferengi and the moment we started mentioning the characteristics of the Ferengi, you can see Ish go from total like, this sounds like bullshit, to like, wait a minute, this is like, okay, this is kind of suspicious, right? And he was like mentioning the things himself because he knew it actually better than I did, right? He knew about their whole religion was based on profit and stuff like that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. That's what I've been watching, right? So then I started like talking about the way they look and the way they act and stuff like that. And then it was like kind of like a realization. So it was kind of a quick one. But it's the idea that like this thing that you think that seems good and you have your certain reasons why it's good could never fall victim to something like that.
Yeah,
right?
and this is why I think it's really important in a sense to have like I'm not someone who believes obviously that you should never engage with a culture that has problematic elements, because I think that's a ridiculous standard. But I think this is why critical analysis is good, and I feel the same way about like some of the discourse around Harry Potter, because like when over the past couple of years, people have been talking about how just completely grotesque, like probably worse than the Ferengi, J.K. Rowling's depiction of the banking goblins in Harry Potter was, like how really virulently anti-Semitic, like almost like it seems straight out of Nazi propaganda. And it's really amazing when you think about these kind of things and you think about how, wow, we enjoyed like this culture that this book, this TV show that may have been an important part of our life at one time, and just allowed allowed some really nasty stuff to just fly under the radar, to just be oblivious to it in a sense. And it can be a bitter pill to swallow when you sometimes recognize those aspects.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Roddenberry created this beautiful, vast universe, and like, how sick is it? Like the moment that he dies,
And
they,
and he emphasized diversity.
yeah, sure, the first interracial kiss and all that stuff. And the
Yeah.
moment he dies, like that, they start introducing characters that he wouldn't have introduced. Which, another thing that I read was he had this thing about conflict that he didn't want. I don't know. I can't speak to it because I don't. I didn't read enough into it to be educated on it. But he had this interesting view on the way he wanted conflict to work on the show, and I think some of the writers were like a little kind of like disagreed with him. So I think when he died, like, some of those things changed. But I'll have to look back into what that means. I don't know if that was like the way some of the characters came off, or the way some of the
Well,
characters
even if you
interacted.
look at I don't know if you've seen Discovery.
Yeah.
So if you look at Discovery, right, when you look at the Klingons, you find that now there's been like a retcon where, the majority of the Klingons are black, right? And the one Klingon who was born with white skin is considered, I mean, he obviously ascends to, rule, but he was considered the lowest of the Klingons. Like, they didn't even want to hear him speak at meetings, or their war meetings or what have you. They didn't want to hear anything he had to say because he was white.
Okay.
And it's just kind of interesting that I saw somebody post when Discovery first came out that Star Trek isn't even worth watching anymore. It's gone off social justice. And I'm like, well, one, it's always been about social justice, and
Yeah.
two, did you not notice this element in Star Trek, which is just like, what are we doing here, right? Like,
Yeah, it depicts a utopian cashless society. I mean, it's kind of hilarious that conservatives who might be Star Trek fans would not pick up on that right away.
I mean, the prime directive, right? Like, you're not even allowed to get involved in other people's affairs, even if you think it's going to be good for them, because they're not.
right.
They're not. They're not. I guess, I don't know if evolved is the right word, but they haven't gotten to the point where they're, you don't want to mess up their progress, I guess.
Right.
You want them to progress at their own natural speed.
So I want to direct your thoughts to Joey, to explicitly what Nick Cannon said. So, to paraphrase, Nick Cannon, and he conflated it all under the white supremacy umbrella. But pretty much what he said was, he was discussing how the importance of melanin, and how, at one point in time, black cultures were, powerful, or pretty much the supremacy was in their, the supremacy ball was in their court, and that white people are, based upon fear, are hateful, and he even said that they're the ones that are closer to animals because of the lack of melanin, which causes them, there's this fear that they'll become extinct, that they'll be eradicated because their whiteness, and I'm paraphrasing, these are my words, and obviously a little bit more extreme than he was trying to be very delicate, that their whiteness will cause them to become extinct. And in order to defend against that, they had to take from people with melanin. They had to take, control them, oppress them, take their ideas, take their technological advances, what have you. And, you know, he then went into the, you know, the Rothschilds and, you know, who controls, you know, the power structures in the world, the Bilderbergs and the such, again, conflating it all under this white supremacy conspiracy umbrella. And so obviously that outraged a lot of people. And that's, I understand that, you know, you saw his apology, you took it as contrite and genuine, and I accept that. I'm just curious to know your thoughts on that thinking.
Yeah, I think, well, the thing is, I mean, in the same way that before we were on camera, Flavius was talking about how, and I don't know if you, I'm sorry if you don't want me to share this, but you were talking about how you have no problem, like when it's someone from a dominant group talking about white people. And I feel the same way, because when you're attacking a dominant group, what you say really has no power to it, because obviously
you're not punching down.
Exactly. Yeah, it has no power to it. So I think that in that sense, what Nick Cannon said about white people in general was less important than what he said about than what he said about Jews, because anti-Semitism is a real problem, and people within marginalized groups can by promoting hateful ideas hurt other marginalized groups, in the same way that I've seen Jewish people who will just post articles from the New York Post, which always in a racist way kind of hypes up like supposed attacks on Jews by black people, which obviously do happen, but they're doing it to justify an increased police presence and increased racial profiling, and I find that disgusting. So that's a racist response to anti-Semitism, and then on the other hand, you have an anti-Semitic response to racism. But to get, I mean, that's kind of a separate point, because to get into the substance of the ideas, like I do think that they are bizarre and are sort of and are not racist in the sense of racism having any sort of institutional power, but are racist in the sense of being of treating race as if it's an inherent characteristic, because it is not. I mean, we like really there's no real biological difference. We all are, I know this is cliche to say, but we all are the human race, and you don't need to create some elaborate pseudo history to point out how white supremacy developed. White supremacy developed as a function of capitalism, and I think capitalism, because like to justify the slave trade, and I think I think that.
See, I would contend, but I think that's a different conversation. I would contend that capitalism developed as a function of white supremacy, but we can have that conversation another time.
I think that's an equally valid point almost. They are very interrelated, but either way, I think that this sort of pseudo racial theory is a misguided response to oppression. And obviously white supremacy is something that has to be dealt with on its own, but it's also interrelated to capitalism. And in the same sense that I think a lot of the conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds and about the Illuminati themselves are disempowering, because they make people think, and obviously it takes a different flavor, but there's white people who believe certain aspects of those theories as well. There's people of every racial background, but what it does is it sort of substitutes the reality, which is that the wealthy don't care about any of us, and they are just enriching themselves, and the reality of the fact that we do need to come together and fight to get a larger share of the world's wealth as working people it sort of sublimates that into all these mystical conspiracy theories about small groups of people who control everything, and it leads to people distrusting each other. At its worst, it leads to racism. I mean, some of those same theories that are adopted, I guess, by Black supremacists, or like melanin theory, they ironically take certain ideas that are also adapted by white supremacists, and
Sure.
in both cases, it's in both, like, just this idea that there's the Rothschilds or the Jews, or in some instances there's other variations of it, like the Freemasons. But basically, any way it's packaged, I feel like it's just a way of disempowering people, leading to people hating and distrusting each other. And oftentimes it's just a good business model for hucksters like Alex Jones, for people that just want you to buy a bunch of gold and guns and go live in a bunker somewhere.
Let me ask you a question, though. I mean, are there conspiracy theories about elite rich people who run the world that have nothing to do with Jewish people?
I think there are. Like,
say, for instance, the Illuminati, right?
The Illuminati.
That's not like,
I mean, that's not inherently anti-Semitic, but I do remember reading that it was basically a theory that was originally developed, I think, by French aristocrats in response to the French Revolution, who just couldn't accept that working people in France had risen up to fight for themselves. So they basically said they were being controlled by a small group of a small German secret society that was pulling their strings. So conspiracy theories themselves are elitist, because they don't, like, in a lot of cases, they don't give working people enough credit for being smart. And I think that I think that's not anti-Semitic, but it operates in a similar way to anti-Semitism, in that, I feel in that both sort of sublimate the sort of just the not sexy realities of capitalism and of the rich exploiting everyone else with basically a scary bedtime story.
Yeah, I just, like, in very simple terms, I want to break that down, because I don't want to conflate conspiracies of, like, rich people pulling the strings and running the world as, like, always being anti-Semitic, right?
Right.
And, like, even if I don't believe in those conspiracy theories, that's like, okay, I mean, they have other names like the Koch brothers, or all of these think tanks, and, like,
Black nobility.
that one. I don't know that one. I know. I'm forgetting.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay.
Some of the terms I've come across.
Okay, I'm just thinking some of the names of the actual groups, like the whatever society, or like whatever groups that actually.
I mean, it gets really deep, right? You get terms like Ramses bloodline. You get,
Yeah, but I'm not talking
nobility.
I'm not
I know
talking
you're
conspiracy theory. I'm talking about actual real people, like the Koch brothers, like actual real.
Well,
rich
yeah. The
people
reason
that
why I
outright
mentioned that
legislation.
is because there are names attached to those.
Okay.
Yes.
You know what I
And
mean?
the
Like,
Koch brothers, I'm sorry, and the Koch brothers, though, like, to me, are a classic example of it. I mean, they're not a conspiracy. They're just two rich guys who are acting in their interest within the incentive structure of capitalism, trying to fight, spending millions on politicians who will support their interests. They'll spend millions to fight against policy that will kill their interest. Like there was a couple years ago where like in Nashville, Tennessee, I think it was, they spent almost $100 million just fighting against this public transportation initiative, and it actually, from from their perspective, because there are people who are amoral and just care about making money, it makes logical sense. The problem is when we don't recognize that that's who they are, and we being everyone else, and fight back against them. And it's actually not very, it's actually not as hard as people think it is to organize and fight back as a unified working class, as people who care about justice coming together. And that's the problem. That's, like I said, is the problem with these conspiracy theories, is I think they themselves, ironically, if there is any conspiracy theory that's true, it's that the rich benefit from conspiracy theories because they keep people distracted about the real nature of the system. Because
Absolutely.
it just leads to this disempowering and cynical view. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but to get back to the original point, no, these theories oftentimes are not anti-Semitic, and they just manifest in similar ways to anti-Semitism. And I mean, Marx, I don't actually know if it was Marx, but it might have been Lenin, but one of the famous communists said that anti-Semitism was the socialism of fools. And I think that sort of could be applied to all of these other conspiracies, including some of the ones you were mentioning, Ish. And I've heard, which, like, all of which I've heard referenced at some point or other.
Yeah. True.
So a term I learned the other day is called fantastical racism.
I haven't heard that one.
So, I'm a comic book guy, right?
Right.
And so I was reading a review of Giant Size X-Men #1, which came out in 1975. And, the point of Giant Size X-Men #1 was to, X-Men have always been about, diversity and attacking. So it's a social commentary, right, on racial prejudice. So it falls in the category of fantastical racism, because what fantastical racism is when you take a creative property, a work of fiction, and you take a group that does not really exist and you put them in a position. A lot of times, in the 60s, people used to do it as a way to, deal with, as a means of social commentary and creative pieces, without actually using, Black people or Jewish people or what have you. They'll create. Perfect example of fantastical racism is the movie Avatar, right? Like, the aliens in the movie would be the oppressed, on their planet, and thus it's a social commentary that speaks to a thing, but we don't actually have to use. That movie is an example of a definition of fantastical racism.
Also, the episode of Star Trek where there's like the one group that's like white on black on one side and black on the other, that hates the people who are black and white on the opposite sides of their face. Right.
Okay. Yeah. These are examples of fantastical racism.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that a lot. There's some Twilight Zone episodes that sort of play with that also, I think.
And, the point is always to kind of, it's meant to be a social commentary, to speak to something that is happening, obviously, in the real world, but they might not necessarily be able to, a Star Trek, right? So we can't talk about civil rights in the 60s, but we can parallel it with, this group or that group and put it in this situation. You understand what I'm saying? Which is
absolutely,
what the X-Men
yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me, and that is one of the great things about a lot of classic sci-fi is, and that's what I liked about Avatar, is I feel like it was very much in the vein of a lot of old school pulp sci-fi that would sort of depict colonial, like sort of serve, yeah, using that concepts of fantastical racism to depict colonialism and issues of capitalism on other worlds. Like Heinlein also, I think, like played around with that concept a lot.
Well, my problem with Avatar, and I don't want to offend anyone that happens to be native. It's not my intention. I always refer to it as Pocahontas in space. Because to me, it's the same story, and what you get is like the white savior trope, right?
Yeah.
But to me, it's literally that you just took that story of Pocahontas, and you put it on another planet.
Pocahontas or Dances with Wolves.
Right. Last Samurai.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like any of these, these, and it's really a trope, and it seems to be an accepted trope. And I know we're going off on a tangent, but it's like, white guy shows up in a completely foreign space, right? And he has to save the people that have always been there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
From whatever terrible thing is going to happen. You know what I mean? He learns their ways. He becomes better at executing their ways, or, demonstrating what they're capable of than they are. And then he ends up saving them.
Yeah, that's exactly that. That is like the oldest trope, and yeah, I can definitely see that with Avatar. Looking back.
Do you think it would be interesting to like troll a like Blue Lives Matter, rally dressed up as like an avatar or maybe a Smurf? Like to stand right next
hilarious.
to them and be like, "Blue lives do matter," and then just to look at them really weird, like,
yeah,
this guy's.
I almost made a meme using the Avatar characters for Blue Lives Matter. Yeah. Actually.
Yeah, I totally that would be hilarious. I would totally do that. Just like paint my skin blue, and yeah, just go in a Smurf costume. That's fucking brilliant. I love that.
Yeah, it is. So is there anything else that you wanted to say, especially concerning, with what's going on with all of the unrest, going on in our country? Do you feel like, the plight of Jewish people as a marginalized group in America is kind of going under the radar? Do you think maybe, we could have a completely different conversation about identity politics, right? Again, I understand the need for certain things. I don't really like the term, because for me, it's like saying water is wet, right? Like, to me. And, you and I have had these conversations before as well, where I feel like if, at least on the left, hopefully on the right as well, but at least on the left, right, equality across the boards was the mission statement, right, then we wouldn't need to emphasize, because I think sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot. Like, I look at history, right? Like, if you look at history, I often say that marginalized groups are the reason why certain conservative talking points have validity, when they were like, our country is, or look how great our country is. Well, it's not because of you, right? It's because women had to fight. It's because marginalized groups had to, you know what I mean, put themselves out there on the front line in order for you to be able to say, well, look at what you're able to do in our country. Look at what, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But when I look at history, right, I also understand that identity politics have also hurt the plights of marginalized groups, in the sense that,
we have less than a minute. We have less than a minute. It's going to cut off again.
All right, we'll pick this up on the next one, because I want to get to a certain point, and I want you to speak on that, Joey.
Yeah, and I'm glad, because I really think this is getting to the heart of the matter. I really appreciate that.
Yep. Well, we'll just hold off until we start on the next one, and then
great.
I'll get to, and definitely I want your opinion. So
cool. Yeah, this is a really excellent discussion.
Oh, I think so as well. I so appreciate